Before we get to the final project in this CSS for Beginners series, there's one more topic to cover, and that's organizing your CSS. I've included a markdown file with this lesson and the sample code, and it just is going to contain an outline of suggestions to organize your CSS. And I say suggestions because there are no hard and fast rules. There are different theories and different takes on this, but the first one is possibly the most important, and that is follow your team. That's a very important rule to go with, because if your team has already established how they're organizing the file, you need to follow that pattern. You're probably a junior dev getting started with them, and you don't really want to rock the boat there. Just follow and, of course, use the pattern that they have, and I'm sure there are reasons for that pattern. After that, we're going to have code examples to look at. So our second reason here, or second suggestion, is to use comments to create headers, or you might call them dividers as well, labels if you will, inside of your CSS. Now we've seen this already throughout this series as we've done a few mini projects, and you've seen that I've provided these headers, which are much like what MDN suggests throughout the CSS. So here's our reset labeled, and then I have one for the variables, and then inside of the root pseudo selector here, you can see I labeled colors. There might be other variables that I would create, and so I might have sub labels here inside of that pseudo selector for that. Then I have utility classes, general styles, and now we get down to blocks, which is something we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But this is just our starter CSS for the day, but you can see how I've already organized it. And those comments will really help you get back up to speed if you come back to your project a month later, or anybody else that's working with you. They'll easily find the section that they're looking for. Okay, the third suggestion here is to sort properties, and typically you sort those properties alphabetically, but this is not everybody's choice. Some people prefer to sort properties in their own groups that they have chosen, and MDN has some suggestions for that too. So I'm going to put a link in the resources to that MDN page that has those other suggestions, and also a link to an article that discusses sorting your CSS properties alphabetically. Now that's not how we write them, so I'm going to show you what I do here in just a second, but I want to give you a memory technique to remember this by. Sorting alphabetically, at least in the English language, we usually say the ABCs, which would be our alphabet. So just remember ABCSS, and that will help you remember sort alphabetically. So ABCSS, if you will. Okay, I'll save the markdown file. Now let me show you an example of this and how to do this in Visual Studio Code. Typically in a small project, it's easy to find these, and really I don't sort them. So you can see I have margin, padding, and box sizing. Now if I did this alphabetically, box sizing would be on top. But that's not how I write CSS. It's not what I'm thinking of when I write the properties. Like if I create a flex box, for example, and we'll see that as we get down here to the body, I have these properties. I had display flex, and then flex flow, justify content, and then align items. Well, that starts with A, but I don't think of it in that order. I would write my CSS in this order, but then to sort it alphabetically, say when I'm done, if I'm working with others, or I want to come back to the project later and of course just find the properties easily. Select all of these properties and then Control P. Now I'm on Windows, that may be a little different on Mac, but Control P to open up the command palette in Visual Studio Code, and then the greater than symbol, and type the word sort. You can see it shows mine says recently used sort lines ascending, but you may not have that. So type the word sort, and then you'll see the different sort choices. Choose sort lines ascending, and you can see it sorted these alphabetically for me. So sort lines ascending is what you want from the command palette. Now they're sorted, and I know what property, say the specific property I'm looking for, maybe align items, it's right at the top, or gap, I know it's going to be right here alphabetically. Likewise, this helps you find issues. Say you had a second gap or a second min height or display, just you accidentally put the property in twice and one was defeating the other due to the cascade. Well, you would find it when you sorted, because then it would say put both displays on lines right beside each other, so you would find those issues. So sorting alphabetically, the ABCSS is a good way to go. Now I'm going to press Control Z to undo that because I'm going to come back and change this in a little bit. And once again, I'm thinking about these flex properties, especially justify content and align items, in that order, and I know right where to find those. Again, small projects, it's much easier to just leave it this way. Okay, back in the Markdown, here's the big one that we're going to spend most of our time on today, and this is for larger projects. You wouldn't typically do this in a small project, but on a team, larger projects, they usually have a naming convention methodology. So I'll put follow a naming convention methodology, if I could spell that right. There we go. Methodology. And a very popular naming convention methodology is BEM, which stands for Block Element Modifier. So Block Element Modifier. There we go. So there are others. This is just a popular one. So I want to go over this popular version, and of course your team may not use this. This may not be the one you adopt going forward, but do know it exists and know that it is used a lot, so you may see it out there in code examples. So now let's go back to our code, and besides what we have here, we start with a block here at the bottom. So you can see I've defined a button class. Now typically, even frameworks and libraries that you may learn later to work with on larger projects will apply classes to put most of the styles on the page. And you can see, other than the HTML and the body, I'm really starting out here with a class. And now above, I have a utility class here and some variables. But other than that, just here in the reset, I had, of course, the button, and I might put an image here and set the display to block or anything else I'd want to do in the reset. But after I get past the big elements of HTML and body, I'm probably going to use classes and these naming conventions, other frameworks and libraries that have been built by third parties. Those usually apply classes as well. So we start out with a block, and here it is. Also, it says AKA components. You may hear some people refer to these as components instead of blocks, but they're talking about the same thing. Now this has a semantic meaning. It's important. It's saying we're defining a button. So the button has a width of 100, a height of 100 pixels both, and a border radius of 15. This is our basic button style that we want to use on the page. And when we go to our HTML, we see 3 buttons, and they all have that class button. And of course, they can have different content. But then we get to the next part of block element modifier methodology, and we're first going to look at the modifiers. I'm going to scroll for a little more room here, and I'll get that just right up to the top of the page. And underneath, I'm going to paste in some code, and we can see those changes. But notice what I've done. I put another comment here that says modifiers. Now this isn't something you would need to do in your code. I am just identifying these for you for the tutorial. But what modifiers are about incremental style changes. So here we're going to have blocks with modifiers. So our button is the block, and then we have 2 dashes, not 1. If we were to name something, we might have 2 words in the name, and we could put 1 dash in between. And this is why BEM uses 2 dashes, and later we'll see 2 underlines. But these 2 dashes indicate that this is going to be a modifier. And then you can see I've got the name secondary. The other one, I've got the name lean. And the third one, I've got border. And here you see a name that has 1 dash in it, so border, and then LG stands for large, so a large border. So these are incremental changes we can make to the blocks with modifiers. Now we don't replace what we previously had, the button class. We add this in addition in our code. So for example, here on our second button, we could put btn -- secondary, and I'll save once I spell secondary correctly. And now you can see we have a yellow button. Notice in the HTML we've applied both the button class and the button secondary class. Likewise, on the third button, we could put our button -- lean, And now we have applied that modifier as well to our block. So our button lean modifier, and the third button here is leaning. And I believe we had another one. Let me look back. Yep, border large. So we could apply another class. You can apply as many as you want to. So we have button dash dash, and then we said border dash large, and save. And of course now it's outlined in white, so it's a little harder to see than what we had with the black border before, but we'll change that here in the future. But it did, of course, make it a little harder to see right now. I could press Alt-Z so that wraps. Well, it didn't. There it is. It's already wrapping. It just wrapped on part of that closing element. But there we've applied modifiers to the blocks. And these modifiers have provided incremental changes to our more important semantic blocks, our buttons. And those are the starting styles that we want. And then of course we can modify them with each class that we apply. Okay, let's move on to elements now. But before we do that, I need to add some HTML over here. We're going to turn our 3 buttons into a header. So I just need to add the rest of the header. So I'll type header and add a class of header to start out. But that closing header tag is going to need to come after all of our buttons as well. So we'll add that much and save, and you can see the changes will be over here to the right. After that, I'm going to add an H1, and it's going to have a different class. So it's going to have header, 2 underscores, and then title. And there we go. And then for the title, I'll just put BEM for our block element modifier lesson, and save that much. Now we see BEM on the page. After that, I'm going to add a nav that will be wrapped around these buttons, and it's going to have a class also that is header, 2 underscores, and nav. And of course I need to put the closing nav after the buttons as well. And I can save. Now we could say we're finished with this and apply some classes, but let me first describe what I'm doing here. So you can see our component is the header. It is the important semantic element. And now what's within it depends upon the header. So we have a header with 2 underscores and then a title. This is the element, the E in BEM, the block element modifier methodology. And then we also have another element that is dependent on the header, and that is the nav. Now inside here, we could say, are these buttons dependent on the header or not? Because if we have a button style we're using throughout our site and not just in the header, we would want to leave this as it is, because this would be important so we don't have to redefine the same button style somewhere else. However, if these are buttons that we're designing a specific way just for the header, then they would become dependent on that header. And if that was the case, then we would say header, 2 underscores, button. And of course we would change everything else here. So I'm going to select one button and then Control D to get the next and the next, and there's one more. There I've got all 5 of them now. And now I'll arrow to the left, and now I'll put header, 2 underscores, and save. And you can see we've changed each one of those classes now because they are dependent on the header. It's also important to note that this does not display the structure. So you might think you need to put header, 2 underscores, then nav and 2 underscores, and then button. That is not the case. You only want to start out with the major component, the block name, the B here. So header, 2 underscores, and then whatever the actual element is. So in this case, it's a button. In this case, it's a nav. And in this case, well, it's an H1, but we're going to call it title because that semantically makes more sense to me. And you can do that. Again, there are no hard and fast rules, but if you're following this pattern, the actual rules for the pattern are 2 underscores and then element. Likewise, for the modifier, 2 dashes and then the modifier. So I'm going to save these changes, and then let's go back and modify the styles that we have over here and include those elements as well. So there is our block section, and we actually need to include the header itself now inside of our block. So I'll start here under our comments and say header. Then we're going to have a background color, and I'm going to say var and change this to our header color or background color that was defined before. So there's the B. After that, we would also have a color. There we go, color. And I'm going to put another var, 2 dashes, and choose color. After that, we're going to have some padding, and I'm going to say 1 rem on the top, 1 rem on the left and right, and 1/2 rem on the bottom. We'll make this a display of flex dash flow. Whoops, flex dash flow is going to be row and no wrap. And then we'll justify content and we'll say space dash between. We'll save that. We definitely see a change, but not everything we want yet. Let's go up and remove some things from the body. All we really need to keep are the first 3 properties. Let's get rid of these bottom 3. And we'll save that, and we see a few changes at the top. Not exactly everything we want yet, but we're getting closer. And I think I forgot the word header on the color, so if I put that, should change those to white letters. That looks a little better as well. And now let's add an elements section that I'm going to put right after our button class. And I'll just put the comments there. It looks like it's wrapping here, but what I wanted to add along with just the elements editor is the comment no standalone meaning. In other words, they're semantically tied to the block. They are dependent upon that block. So it's not just a button, it's going to be the header button style. And likewise, it does not represent the structure. So what we do not want is the header underscore 2 underscores nav 2 underscores button. You would not want that. You would just want header underscore button. And I don't know why I have the period there. Well, that's weird. I'll Control Z to change that again. Maybe that's marking something. Let's see if I can just back up one. Not header nav underscore button and save. Okay, got the comments there. Now I actually need to put in the style. Well, it's going to be the same as the buttons. So I'll just copy this, Control X to move it down, put it underneath and paste it in, but we're going to change this now to our header 2 underscores and button. Now we have our button style back in place for the header, but we don't have any of the modifiers in place that we applied to the HTML. So I'm going to select all 3 instances of the .btn here, arrow to the left, 1 arrow to the right, and type header 2 underscores, and now they should once again be applied, and we can see that. So we have the yellow background here, and we also have the leaning button here on the 3rd one. Let's check that border large. Maybe we just need to change that color to see it better, or we could apply another class that would help us see it better. So besides the button lean and border large, let's go ahead and apply the header 2 underscore button dash dash secondary to this 3rd button as well. And now we can see the yellow color here, and then we see the white border as well. Notice there is a space between each class that we apply to these elements in the HTML. Okay, jumping back to the style, now we have modifiers that are applied to the elements instead of the blocks. You can apply a modifier to either one, but just know an element is going to have the 2 underscores, and of course a block is just going to be the class defined, such as header, or previously we had .btn for button. Now this all helps with organization, and like I said, when you're working on teams, it's great to have that document communicate what you're working on as fast as possible and follow the pattern of the team. And if you just have a large project on your own, this may help as well. One other thing this can help with, and I want to show this with the element section, is when we're selecting something, it's good to say a class like .header has a specificity of 10. And we've seen that with the specificity calculator that should still be linked in the course resources. However, if we did this, and then instead of using an element selector such as BEM, which is a class, when it's all said and done, this is just a class, a header 2 underscores button, instead of header space button, if we did this, which says the class and then the element within the class, or any button elements within the class. This has a specificity of 11 instead of 10. It's much better to keep that specificity even, and using classes like this helps you do that as well. So that is just an added bonus that I wanted to go ahead and mention. I hope all of these suggestions help you organize your CSS in the future, and I plan to use some of them coming up next on the final project.